Hello friends, I am Dr. Kuldeep Mohadikar in this chapter from my series Literary Pearls, which is entitled as Samuel Taylor Coleridge as a Romantic Poet. Coleridge has been called the high priest of Romanticism. As O.M. Bora remarks, his three great poems, The Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan, and Christabel, are his supreme contribution to poetry and of all English romantic masterpieces. They are the most unusual and the most romantic. This is so because in his poetry, all the chief characteristics of romanticism find rich expression. With Wordsworth, Coleridge is the co founder of the Romantic movement in English literature. The Romantic laid great emphasis on imagination. For them, imagination was a divine faculty through which it was possible to see into the heart of things. They connected with intuition, perception, and insight and said that it is only through this faculty that one can possibly realize the truth. By the power of his imagination, Coleridge pursued the unseen forces at work which worked behind the visible world, and through his poetry, he tried to convey his perception of the mystery of things to others. His poetry, therefore, is more mysterious and strange than that of any other romantic poet. It is the power of imagination that makes the supreme poet of the supernatural, which creates a sense of strangeness and wonder, and therefore better justifies definition of romanticism as, I quote, the addition of strangeness to beauty, and I unquote here, and Watts Dutton says that, I quote, the renaissance of wonder, I unquote, by, uh, by treating the supernatural as a psychic phenomenon. He opened out uh, a rich literary path. The very center of his lies in evoking the mystery of thing. Stupert Brooke says, I quote, his best work is little but unique of its kind for exquisite metrical movement and imagination fantasy. There is nothing in our language to be compared with Christabel and Kubla Khan. I unquote. The chief characteristics of romanticism are subjectivity, spontaneity, love of the supernatural, melancholy, and love of nature. All romantic literature is subjective. It is an expression of the inner urges of the soul of the artist. Romantic poetry is fanciful, introspective, and is often marked by extravagance. Romantic poetry is spontaneous overflow of powerful passions. The romantic is extraordinary alive to the wonder. Coleridge was a great dreamer of dream. That took keen interest in illusions, hallucinations, magic, and dreams. The dream quality of his poetry is essentially a romantic trait or a romantic characteristic or a romantic feature. His poetry is therefore entirely a subjective affair. It has got nothing to do with the material world. His Kubla Khan is a dream poem. It is a very famous poem, though it is in fragments. The medievalism movement was a part and parcel of romanticism, and it played an important role in bringing about the romantic revival. Coleridge's greatest contribution to the romantic movement is the recreation of the medieval atmosphere of wonder and mystery, of women waiting for their demon lovers, or the maidens praying for their absent ones. The embossed shield are all characteristics of the Middle Ages. The remote and the distance exercised a strange fascination over the Romantics, and Coleridge was no exception in this aspect. Coleridge is also romantic because of his deep love of nature. This love of nature makes him romantic lover. This attitude to nature in his early poems is much the same as Wordsworth. Coleridge loved nature too much. In some of his nature pieces, He is sensuous as John Keats. He often finds in nature symbols of his thoughts and feelings, and often he reflects his own soul. In the beginning of his career, he was a pantheist, out by the time of the dejection ode, Denial. He returned to nature and made her dependent on human moods. I quote here, "O lady, we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live." A strain of melancholy despair was characteristic feature of romantic poetry. The romantics were frustrated and disjustified personalities who made their poetry an expression of their frustration. This romantic note of melancholy is also present in the poetry of Coleridge. In his dejection ode and in pains of sleep, he sounds a note of despair. In the dejection of ode, he complains, "My genial spirits fall," and that he suffers from a grief without punch, void, dark, and order. The Romantics also were great lovers of music, and Coleridge, with the possible exception, is the greatest in this respect. The melody of his verse is unique and has been admired by all his critics. According to Sainsbury, he reached the highest point of English verse music. Christabel and the Ancient Mariner have a number of artistic sound patterns, and the music of Kubla Khan is haunting and weird. Romantic poetry was poetry of revolt against the artificial diction of 18th century and the tyranny of heroic couplet. Though Coleridge did not subscribe to Wordsworth's theory of poetic diction, yet his style is marked with a charming simplicity entirely his own. He discarded the heroic couplet and experimented with number of ancient meters. He was a great innovator in the field. In the Ancient Mariner, he uses the old ballad meter with perfect mastery, and in Christabel, he displays ballad meter with perfect mastery, and in Christabel, he displays full command over the music of octosyllabic couplet. Uh, Beautifully summed up his musical ability when he wrote, I quote, "The tendency in the art of poetry to approximate to the art of music is manifest in all its characteristic places. Certain limitation of Coleridge poetry may now be noted. First, his poetic output is extremely limited. Secondly, the period during which his creative genius was at his best was brief, and therefore much that he has written is flat, gross, and dull. Thirdly, his poetry is dream poetry, and as such, it does not deal with the realities of life. Fourthly, even the little as he could compose is fragmentary. His Kubla Khan and Christabel are mere fragments. But in spite of all its limitations, Coleridge poetry ranks among the rarest treasure of English literature. Romanticism reaches its highest point in his poetry. So this was all about Samuel Taylor Coleridge as a romantic poet. Thanks, friends.